My name is Lena Whitmore, and I learned very early that in my family, appearance outranks accuracy. Truth is flexible, reputation is sacred, and discomfort is always assigned to the quietest person in the room. That person was usually me. I was 27 years old when the dinner happened, the one that finally shifted something inside me, the one I still replay in my head when I wonder why I stopped trying to earn my place at that table. I wasn't surprised when people laughed. I'd grown up with that sound, the polite chuckles, the awkward smiles, the kind of laughter that pretends to be harmless while carving its message clean into your ribs. Try harder. Blend better. Stop making things uncomfortable just by existing. Nothing about my life fit neatly into the story my parents liked to tell about themselves. They loved milestones, promotions, titles that sounded impressive when dropped into conversation at church or charity events. Anything that couldn't be summarized in a sentence was quietly dismissed as unfinished, or worse, unserious. So when my younger sister announced she was bringing her new boyfriend to Sunday dinner, I already knew how the night would end. I just didn't know how badly. The house hadn't changed since I left for college. Same white siding, same trimmed hedges, same porch light that flickered like it couldn't quite commit. From the outside, it looked calm, stable, respectable. A place where nothing unpleasant ever happened. Inside, it was immaculate in that stiff, staged way my mother preferred. Plates aligned, candles lit, everything placed with intention, as if a magazine photographer might knock at any second. She greeted me with a quick hug that didn't quite land, then immediately glanced at the clock. "You're cutting it close," she said lightly, like it was a joke, like it wasn't a familiar accusation dressed up as concern. "I'm here before dinner," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She smiled, satisfied, and turned back to the kitchen island. My father sat at the table with a stack of mail, glasses low on his nose. He nodded at me without looking up. That was his version of affection. Acknowledgement without engagement. I took my usual seat, the one at the corner of the table, close enough to be present, far enough to be ignored. A few minutes later, the front door opened again, and the energy in the room changed. My sister, Claire, walked in first, glowing in the way people do when they feel chosen. Right behind her was Nathan Brooks, tall, confident, smiling like he'd already decided everyone would like him. And they did. My mother's posture straightened. My father stood to shake his hand. Their faces lit up like someone had just handed them a better version of the future. Nathan had that polished ease, the kind that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. He spoke clearly, laughed at the right moments, told stories that placed him conveniently at the center of important conversations. He was, unmistakably, their type. Dinner began the way it always did, conversation flowing around me instead of toward me. My mother asked Nathan about his work. My father followed up with approving nods. Claire watched them all with quiet pride. Nathan talked about his job in consulting, his projects, his clients, his schedule packed with meetings and travel. He used words that sounded impressive without ever landing on specifics. Everyone ate it up. I focused on my plate, nodding when required, keeping my comments minimal. I'd learned long ago that speaking too much only invited inspection. Eventually, as it always did, the attention turned to me. Not directly, not at first. Nathan glanced my way with an expression that suggested friendly curiosity. The kind people use when they think they're being kind. "So, Lena," he said, casual, relaxed, "what are you working on these days?" The table went quiet in that expectant way that made my shoulders tighten. "I'm between contracts right now," I said simply. My mother shifted in her chair. My father's jaw set. Claire suddenly became very interested in her fork. Nathan nodded slowly, like he'd just been handed a piece of information that confirmed something he'd already assumed. "Oh," he said, leaning back slightly, "so you've got a lot of free time then." The laugh came quickly. Not cruel, not loud, just enough. My mother smiled, indulgent. My father chuckled once. Claire smiled thinly, like she wanted to disappear. I felt the familiar heat rise in my face, not embarrassment, but recognition. Here we go. Nathan kept talking, warming to the room. I just think structure is important, he said, gesturing with his glass. You know, having somewhere to be, something to build toward. Otherwise, it's easy to drift. My mother laughed again, louder this time. Some people could learn from that, she said, not looking at me, which somehow made it worse. I didn't respond. Silence had always been my safest option. Nathan continued, now fully comfortable, describing his workload, his responsibilities, the pressure of managing high-level analysis. He talked about leadership reviews, performance forecasting, internal audits, phrases stacked neatly like bricks. And that's when something inside me paused, just for a second, because the words he used didn't quite fit together. He mentioned a type of review that wasn't typically handled by the department he claimed to be in. It was subtle, technical, the kind of thing only someone familiar with corporate structures would notice. I didn't react. I just listened. As he spoke, I noticed more tiny inconsistencies, terms borrowed from different roles, processes that didn't align, stories that sounded rehearsed rather than lived. No one else caught it. Why would they? Nathan sounded confident, and confidence has a way of filling gaps before anyone thinks to look for them. By the time dessert was served, the table had fully accepted him as everything I was not: accomplished, focused, impressive. I smiled politely when required, excused myself early, and drove home with a familiar heaviness settling in my chest. But this time, something else rode alongside it: curiosity. The next morning, the dinner replayed in my mind while I made coffee. Not the insult, not the laughter, the details. I opened my laptop. I didn't go looking for dirt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just checking. Public information, company websites, organizational charts, job descriptions. On paper, Nathan's role existed, but the responsibilities he described didn't. They belonged to different divisions, different teams, sometimes even different companies. I told myself it meant nothing. People exaggerate, people simplify, people borrow language. Still, the discomfort lingered. That afternoon, I messaged someone I used to work with, casually asking about workflow in Nathan's company. I didn't mention names. I didn't frame it as suspicion. The reply came quickly, and it didn't match Nathan's story, not even close. I closed my laptop and sat back on the couch, heart beating just a little faster now. This wasn't about being mocked at dinner anymore. This was about something that didn't add up. And for the first time in my life, I realized something quietly powerful. The person my family admired most might be standing on a story that couldn't survive scrutiny. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't tell Claire. I didn't say a word. I just started paying closer attention. Because performers rely on scripts, and scripts always crack when someone listens carefully enough. And I had all the time in the world to listen. After that first search, after the quiet realization that Nathan's story didn't quite sit right, I did what I had always done best. I slowed down. I didn't spiral. I didn't rush to conclusions. I didn't let emotion take the wheel. I let patterns speak. The strange thing about doubt is that once it appears, it doesn't shout. It whispers. It lingers. It nudges your attention back to moments you almost ignored. Over the next few days, my life moved forward on the surface. I answered emails, cooked dinner, went for long walks around my neighborhood. But underneath it all, my mind replayed fragments of that Sunday night. The confidence, the jargon, the way Nathan redirected questions before anyone could dig deeper. And the more I thought about it, the more something else stood out. He never lied directly. He implied. He suggested. He allowed people to draw conclusions he never technically stated. That's how professionals who fabricate survive, by staying just far enough from specifics to deny everything later. On Thursday afternoon, I received a message from Marcus Hale, a former colleague I trusted. Marcus was sharp, meticulous, and allergic to nonsense. If something didn't make sense, he noticed. I hadn't told him why I was asking. I'd kept it casual. His reply was short. Those responsibilities don't exist in that role. Not here, not anywhere I know. My stomach tightened, not with panic, but with confirmation. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop. Not to accuse, not to plan revenge, just to organize. I wrote down everything Nathan had claimed at dinner. Every role, every responsibility, every accomplishment he'd mentioned casually between bites of food and sips of wine. Then I cross-referenced, slowly, carefully, and the list of inconsistencies grew. He'd referenced leadership reviews typically handled by senior internal committees. Committees he was far too junior to access. He spoke about forecasting models used in entirely different sectors than the one he claimed to work in. He talked about client meetings that would have required certifications he didn't hold. None of it was dramatic on its own, but together, it formed something unmistakable, a performance. By the weekend, curiosity had hardened into resolve, not because he'd mocked me, not because my family laughed, but because I recognized the structure. I'd seen it before, in corporate spaces, in consulting environments, in people who sold certainty while outsourcing the truth. People like Nathan didn't just lie for attention, they lied because the lie worked, and right now it was working very well. The next family gathering came sooner than expected. A birthday brunch for my father, held at a restaurant my parents loved because it looked impressive online. White tablecloths, minimalist decor, the kind of place where people spoke softly even when laughing. Nathan arrived late, fashionably so, slipping into his seat with an apology that somehow sounded like a boast. "Crazy week," he said. "Back-to-back meetings." My parents nodded with understanding admiration. I watched him more closely this time, the way he held eye contact when speaking, but looked away when asked questions, the way he laughed before finishing sentences, a tactic to soften scrutiny, the way he spoke in conclusions rather than explanations. Everything about him was designed to project certainty without inviting inspection. At one point, my father asked him about a project he'd mentioned previously. Nathan responded smoothly, but his answer contradicted what he'd said the week before. No one noticed, except me. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't coincidence. This was habit. After brunch, I walked home instead of driving. The air was crisp, the sidewalks quiet. Each step felt like grounding, like separating myself from the emotional fog my family thrived in. I pulled out my phone and sent one message. "Hey, do you still have access to public filings and corporate records?" The reply came minutes later. "Of course. What do you need?" That was when I contacted Jordan Reyes. Jordan and I had worked together years earlier on a consulting contract. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, but he was thorough, and more importantly, discreet. I didn't explain the family connection. I didn't vent. I didn't dramatize. I sent him Nathan's name, the company he claimed to work for, and asked one simple question. "Can you verify employment history and affiliations?" Jordan didn't ask why. He never did. He just said, "Give me a day." While I waited, I continued my own research. I searched conference archives for presentations Nathan claimed to have given. Nothing. I searched professional networking sites for articles he'd referenced. Nothing. I searched industry panels he'd mentioned casually. Nothing. It wasn't that he didn't exist. It was that the version of him he presented had no footprint. That's when I realized something important. Nathan wasn't hiding. He was inflating. And inflation always bursts under pressure. Jordan's message arrived the following evening. It was longer this time. He'd attached documents, public records, corporate filings, and one detail that made my breath hitch slightly. Nathan's name appeared on paperwork connected to a small consulting entity, registered under a generic business name. No website, no staff listings, no client references, just an address tied to a virtual office space. At first glance, it looked harmless. Plenty of professionals register side ventures, but the timing didn't align. The company existed longer than Nathan claimed to have been employed at his current firm. And more importantly, the business activity didn't match his narrative. There were no contracts, no revenue streams, just sporadic deposits. Jordan highlighted them for clarity. Amounts varied, spacing irregular, no invoices attached, no outgoing payments to vendors or services. It wasn't consulting, it was collection. My chest tightened. Not fear, not anger, understanding. I thanked Jordan and closed my laptop. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt concerned. Because people who construct identities like Nathan's rarely do so without motive. The next call came from my sister. It had been weeks since she'd reached out directly. Her voice sounded bright, excited. "We're getting engaged," she said. I congratulated her, and meant it. Claire deserved happiness. What she didn't deserve was a foundation built on illusion. She talked about rings, venues, timelines. Nathan's name came up constantly, wrapped in admiration, trust, certainty. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. This wasn't about exposing him publicly. This wasn't about humiliating him the way he'd humiliated me. This was about preventing damage, and damage thrives in silence. Over the next few weeks, I gathered information methodically. No hacking, no spying, no lines crossed. Everything I collected was publicly accessible or voluntarily shared. I traced the shell company's financial patterns. Jordan helped connect dots. Deposits from individuals. No return transactions. No documented services rendered. Then came the forums. Private investment discussion boards. Small communities. And there he was. Different username, same writing style, same phrases, same buzzwords, promising opportunities, exclusive access. One post caught my attention. Someone asked for clarification on returns. Nathan's profile responded defensively, dismissively. Another user replied days later, "I invested, haven't heard back in months." The date was 2 years earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled. Not because I was scared, but because the picture was complete. Nathan wasn't just exaggerating. He was operating on belief, on trust, on the authority people gave him because he sounded like he belonged. And my family had given him that authority instantly. The engagement party invitation arrived soon after. Elegant, formal, optimized for appearances. My parents called to confirm I was attending. Their tone was careful, measured, as if my presence needed to be managed. "I'll be there," I said, and I meant it. Not to cause a scene, not to confront, just to observe. Nathan performed beautifully that night. He charmed guests, told stories, accepted compliments with practiced humility. I watched how people responded to him, how easily they deferred, how quickly they trusted. It terrified me. Because I recognized how many people like him succeed not because they are competent, but because others are eager to believe. That night, I went home and organized everything into one folder. Timelines, documents, screenshots, no commentary, no emotion, just facts. Because facts don't need volume. They need timing. I didn't know yet when I would speak. I only knew this. If I stayed silent, I would become complicit. And I had spent my entire life being quiet for the comfort of others. That chapter was ending. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked neatly between a credit card offer and a grocery flyer, as if it were just another piece of routine mail. Cream-colored envelope, gold lettering, perfectly centered, Claire and Nathan Brooks. Seeing their names together like that did something strange to my chest. Not pain, not anger, finality. I opened it slowly, reading every word even though none of it surprised me. The venue was a vineyard outside the city, expensive, scenic, chosen entirely for how it would photograph. The dress code was formal. The tone was celebratory. The subtext was clear. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a display. I RSVP'd yes the same evening, not out of obligation, not out of guilt. Because by then, I understood something my family never had. Truth doesn't interrupt performances. It waits until the audience is fully invested. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed quietly, too quietly. My parents didn't call to ask how I was doing. My mother texted logistical reminders, parking instructions, timing details. My father sent a single message reminding me to be punctual. Claire sent nothing. Nathan sent nothing. I watched from a distance as photos appeared online. Engagement shoots, venue previews, champagne glasses clinking in carefully staged frames. Nathan always stood slightly forward in the photos, always angled toward the camera, always smiling like someone who had rehearsed this exact role. And people loved him. Friends commented, relatives praised. My parents shared every post with captions about how proud they were. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just prepared. The folder on my desk grew thicker, more organized. Everything inside it was clean, factual, sourced. No accusations, no speculation, just reality. Because if I was going to speak, I would speak once. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and still, not stormy, not dramatic, just quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I dressed carefully, neutral colors, nothing attention-grabbing. I didn't want to be memorable for how I looked. I wanted to be remembered for what I did. The drive to the vineyard took just under an hour, long enough to think, not long enough to second-guess. As I turned onto the gravel road leading to the venue, I saw rows of cars already parked, guests arriving in clusters, laughing, adjusting outfits, performing happiness. I parked at the far end, sat in my car for a moment, breathed, not nerves, resolve. The ceremony was flawless, painfully so. White chairs aligned in perfect rows, soft music drifting through hidden speakers, the smell of flowers mixed with fresh grass. Claire walked down the aisle glowing, radiant, convinced she was stepping into the safest chapter of her life. Nathan waited at the altar, composed, confident, hands folded like someone who belonged there. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, applause erupted. Everyone stood, everyone smiled, everyone believed. I clapped politely, my palms barely touching, because belief is fragile. The reception unfolded like a magazine spread. Candles flickered, wine flowed, conversations overlapped in warm, curated hums. My parents moved through the crowd like proud hosts, introducing Nathan to distant relatives, repeating his achievements like a resume they'd memorized. "This is my son-in-law," my father said more than once, chest lifted. Nathan shook hands, accepted praise, delivered humility with practiced ease. I watched him closely. He never stayed in one conversation too long. He redirected when questions became specific. He laughed at himself strategically. Everything about him was controlled. It would have impressed me if I hadn't known what sat quietly in my clutch. The speeches began after dinner. Claire spoke first, voice trembling with emotion, thanking everyone for believing in their love. She thanked Nathan for being steady, reliable, trustworthy. My mother wiped away tears. Nathan followed. He spoke about partnership, about building something real, about integrity. Integrity. The word echoed in my ears, sharp and ironic. Applause thundered. Glasses raised. The performance peaked. And that's when I stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically. I waited until the applause softened, until guests began shifting back into conversation. Then I walked forward. I didn't approach the microphone. I didn't ask for attention. I walked directly to Claire and Nathan. Claire saw me first. Her face softened. Relief flickered there. She thought I was there to congratulate her. Nathan noticed next. His smile hesitated. just slightly. I opened the folder, held it between us, not high, not hidden, visible. "What's that?" he asked, voice light, curious. "Something you should see," I said calmly. Claire leaned in. Her smile faded as her eyes moved across the first page. Confusion came first, then disbelief, then something colder. Nathan's posture shifted, his shoulders tightened. He glanced around, suddenly aware of how close people were standing. "What is this?" he asked again, sharper this time. I didn't answer him. I looked at my sister. "These are public records," I said gently. "Financial filings, business registrations, transaction histories. Nothing illegal to look at. Nothing speculative." Claire flipped another page. Her hands trembled. Nathan reached for the folder. I didn't pull it away. I let him take it. That was the moment everything changed, because confidence collapses fast when someone realizes the script is no longer working. Nathan laughed, too quickly, too loudly. "This is ridiculous," he said, scanning the pages. "You're seriously doing this here?" Guests nearby began to notice. Conversation stalled. My parents appeared at our sides, expressions tightening. "What's going on?" my mother demanded. Nathan straightened. "She's trying to cause a scene," he said smoothly, handing the folder to my father like it was contaminated. My father flipped through it, his face drained of color. "Lena," my mother hissed. "What are you doing?" I answered calmly. "I'm making sure Claire knows who she married." The silence that followed was deafening, not shocked silence. Real silence. The kind that settles when people sense something irreversible has entered the room. Nathan tried to recover. He explained. Deflected. Dismissed. He talked about misunderstandings, side ventures, complex finances people wouldn't understand. But here's the thing about lies. They require energy, and truth doesn't. Every explanation he gave raised new questions. Every attempt to minimize only highlighted the gaps. Claire stared at him, eyes searching, waiting for something solid to hold on to. It never came. My father's voice rose. "This is inappropriate," he snapped at me. "Today is not the day for this." My mother nodded fiercely. "You're doing this for attention," she said. "You always do." I looked at them both, really looked, and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just distance. "I didn't raise my voice," I said quietly. "I didn't accuse him of anything I can't prove. I didn't interrupt the ceremony. I waited." Nathan tried one last time. He turned to Claire, took her hands. "You know me," he said. "You trust me." She pulled her hands back, slowly, carefully. "I thought I did," she said. Her voice cracked, and just like that, the illusion shattered. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I stepped back, placed the folder on the table between them, and walked away. Behind me, voices rose. Questions flew. Truth spread. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I reached my car and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. No adrenaline, no triumph, just peace. I haven't spoken to my parents since that day. They sent messages accusing me of ruining everything. I didn't respond. Claire called once, crying, confused. I listened. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything. Some truths need space to land, and some relationships don't survive honesty. That's not cruelty. That's reality. Here's what I learned. Families that prioritize image will always resent the person who reveals cracks. People who perform success fear scrutiny more than failure, and walking away isn't weakness. It's self-respect. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Before you go, tell me in the comments. What do you think is harder? Speaking the truth when no one wants to hear it, or walking away when they never will? And if you believe stories like this matter, if you believe quiet voices deserve space too, subscribe. Because silence ends the moment someone decides to speak. If you've stayed with this story until now, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to tell or to hear because they force us to sit with uncomfortable questions about family, loyalty, and silence. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer. What do you believe hurts more? Staying quiet to keep the peace or telling the truth and becoming the problem? Let me know in the comments. And also tell me this. Have you ever been the one in your family who saw things clearly but wasn't believed? If you're watching from the US or anywhere else in the world, drop your city or state below. I read more comments than you think, and I want to know how far this story reached. If stories about quiet strength, emotional intelligence, and walking away with dignity resonate with you. Consider subscribing, not for drama, not for chaos, but for stories that remind us that truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. Now, here's what happened after the wedding. Part 4, the aftermath. I thought the silence would feel heavier. That was the first thing that surprised me. The morning after the wedding, I woke up expecting the familiar knot in my chest, the reflexive urge to check my phone, the anxiety that usually followed any moment of conflict with my family. But none of that came. Instead, there was quiet. Not the tense, loaded kind, the honest kind. Sunlight spilled across my bedroom floor, soft and unbothered, like the world hadn't noticed anything extraordinary had happened at all. And in a way, it hadn't. The truth doesn't shake the world. It only shakes the people who are standing on lies. My phone stayed still for most of the morning. No messages, no missed calls. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and let myself exist without bracing for impact. That was new. Around noon, the first text arrived. From my mother. I hope you're satisfied. No greeting, no question, just accusation. I stared at the screen for a long moment, noticing how little it stirred inside me. There was a time when a message like that would have unraveled me, when I would have rushed to explain myself, to soften the blow, to reframe the truth in a way that made it easier for her to swallow. That instinct didn't appear. I set the phone down without replying, and that felt like progress. By the afternoon, the messages multiplied. My father, an aunt, a cousin I barely spoke to. Different words, same theme. Why would you do this? You embarrassed the family. That wasn't your place. Not one message asked if the information was false. Not one. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't angry because I lied. They were angry because I didn't protect the image. Claire called that evening. I almost didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew this conversation would matter. When I picked up, she was crying. Not hysterical, not loud, just broken in that quiet, exhausted way that comes after adrenaline fades. I don't know what's real anymore, she said. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the couch. I know, I replied softly. She told me Nathan had left the venue early, that arguments erupted once guests started connecting dots, that questions poured in faster than he could dodge them. She said he alternated between anger and pleading, between blaming me and begging her to trust him. I keep replaying everything, she said. All the stories, all the times I ignored that weird feeling in my stomach. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. When she finally paused, I said the only thing that felt honest. You're not stupid for believing someone who wanted to be believed. She cried harder then, and for the first time, I felt like we were standing on the same side of the truth. Over the next few weeks, pieces fell where they always do, once illusion cracks. Slowly, messily. Nathan didn't disappear overnight. People like him rarely do. Instead, stories shifted, accounts changed, explanations evolved, but the confidence never fully returned, because once people see behind the curtain, they can't unsee it. Claire moved out temporarily, told friends she needed space. said nothing publicly but said everything with her absence. My parents doubled down. They insisted I had overstepped, that even if Nathan wasn't perfect, family matters should stay private. That phrase became their shield, private. What they really meant was contained. I listened without arguing, and then I stopped listening. Something unexpected happened during that time. My life got lighter, not dramatically, not overnight, but in small, noticeable ways. I slept better. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I noticed how much energy I had spent managing other people's comfort, and without that weight, I had room. Room to focus. Room to breathe. Room to build. A month after the wedding, I got an email from Jordan. Short. Professional. He said regulatory interest had surfaced around the shell company, that people were asking questions Nathan could no longer redirect. Nothing explosive yet, just momentum, Truth's favorite ally. I thanked him and closed my laptop, feeling strangely detached. It wasn't my battle anymore. It never really was. Claire and I met for coffee one morning, weeks later. She looked different. Not polished. Real. We talked about small things at first. Safe things. Eventually, she said, "I don't think I ever really knew him." I nodded. "I think you knew the version he needed you to see." She looked at me, eyes searching. "Why didn't anyone listen to you growing up?" The question landed harder than I expected. I thought about it for a moment. "Because I didn't perform confidence," I said. "I questioned things." She smiled sadly. "That was never a flaw." I smiled back. "I know." My parents and I didn't reconcile, not because I refused to, because reconciliation would have required accountability, and they weren't ready for that. Maybe they never would be. And for the first time, I accepted that without grieving it. Family isn't defined by proximity. It's defined by protection. Here's the truth. No one tells you loudly enough. When you're the one who sees clearly in a family built on appearances, you become a threat. Not because you're cruel, not because you're wrong, but because you disrupt the illusion. And illusions hate witnesses. Walking away doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop sacrificing yourself for their comfort. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if you've ever been labeled difficult for telling the truth, if you've ever been minimized because you didn't play the role assigned to you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not wrong. You are not the problem. Sometimes you're just standing in a room that benefits from your silence, and leaving that room is an act of courage. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Your words matter more than you know. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet strength, clarity, and choosing yourself, subscribe. Because the truth doesn't need a stage. It only needs one person willing to stand with it.